For those who seek adventure, this is the Buffalo Roamer Podcast, sharing the people, places, and moments that make a life on the loose worth living.
The thing that's going to stick out to you most is when they open up that plane door. The cold is something like you've never felt.
The jungle's so thick, even if you had a machete, you couldn't get through it.
There's a huge blonde grizzly bear. And when it saw us, this thing put its head down, stomped on the ground, and hissed like an alligator.
I just crossed this brutal stretch of desert, and I was really suffering.
I'm your host, Will Collins. I'm an adventurer, outdoorsman, and roamer of wild places. I've backpacked the Brooks Range, rafted the Grand Canyon, and have canoed from source to sea, both the Mississippi and Yukon rivers. I live for adventure, travel, fresh air, and diving into the unknown. And now, I hope to share my passion with you on the Buffalo Roamer Podcast. All right, episode 39 of the Buffalo Roamer Podcast. Here we go. Want to remind you, if you like what you're hearing, if you're digging the show, please subscribe to us wherever you are listening to this podcast. If you're listening in Spotify, go give us a 5-star rating in the Spotify app. That'll help us out a lot. And as always, you can find more info at buffaloroamer.com. All right, today's show is going to be a good one. We got Cliff Jacobsen on the podcast. I've been wanting to chat with Cliff, I should say, for quite some time. We've been talking back and forth about trying to line up a live broadcast of this podcast at one of the adventure expos and outdoor conventions around the Midwest, but weren't able to connect with everything going on. So we got a chance to catch up over Zoom here on this podcast. And for those who don't know, Cliff Jacobsen, he is one of the foremost experts in canoeing and camping here in North America. He's an outdoor writer. He has well over 20 top-selling books on camping and canoeing. He's the most published outdoor author of the 20th and 21st century. He is in the American Canoe Association Hall of Fame, and he is an OG on the canoe tour circuit, talking at different expos and writing books and getting people out into the woods. He was a guide for a long time as well. So really enjoyed the conversation with Cliff Jacobsen on the Buffalo Roamer Podcast. Cliff, excited to have you on, man. It's been looking forward to chatting to you. We were talking just a little bit back and forth. I would have loved to have been able to do this conversation in person at one of the expos that you're so well known at, but the Zoom will have to do.
Yeah, I guess we will. I had developed a little problem in my lower leg that makes it difficult for me to walk very far. But, and I've been to Mayo, and we're trying to solve it. But right now, because I can't walk, sometimes I can walk fine, and other times it just shuts me down, and I sit down for a few minutes, get up, and then I'm okay for another few minutes. So sure. I just can't do personal appearances. Plus, I'll tell you, this COVID thing.
I know, it's a weird one.
I'm triple vaxxed, and I still got COVID after the triple vax. And it was about 9 days. It wasn't pleasant. It wasn't as bad. It wasn't as bad as the flu. The flu is really bad. Sure. But you don't want to get it.
No.
And I masked constantly. And I was wearing an N95 mask, and somehow I think I got it on the airplane to Los Angeles. Yeah. And I only took my mask off for 5 minutes to drink a cup of coffee.
Strangest thing. Welcome to 2022. Well, hopefully we'll get this stuff. Who knows how it'll all play out, but I sure hope so. We can get it in the rearview mirror and get back to some more regular expos and stuff, because those are always great. The conferences and things where you're able to sit down and chat with other paddlers and outdoor enthusiasts and share tidbits and insights and new trips. And so those are always fun, but hopefully we'll get back to it.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that. But
hey, no problem.
Virtual,
I understand.
Guys.
That's good. That's good. Okay, well, Cliff, give me a little rundown or a resume of the backdrop of Cliff Jacobsen in the outdoor world for some of our listeners. Just how you introduce yourself.
Well, I don't know. I'm not sure how to introduce myself, but I guess I loved this stuff ever since I was a kid. And I grew up in Chicago in the third-story apartment building, and I read, and for some reason or other, I was hooked on it. I read every single book that had been written about wilderness camping and canoeing. I went to the library and I got them all. And then I just started growing with the sport. I went Boy Scouts, was Eagle Scout, went through all the Boy Scout stuff, and then I got total hooked on it. And one of the things I discovered over the years is, you know what? And I'm totally convinced of this. It's a gene, man. It's a gene. Either you have it or you don't have it. And I say this because when I started taking teenagers on canoe trips in the Boundary Waters, and when I was teaching school, I taught 8th grade environmental science, and I also started a sort of an outdoor program called Wilderness Experience. We did rock climbing, canoeing, orienteering, all sorts of stuff. And then we took the kids on a week-long trip in the Boundary Waters, and then we had a more advanced one where we took trips on canoe trips in Canada. In those days, you could do it.
Sure.
And I would observe these kids, and I just by a couple comparisons. I remember some kids, it's a perfect weather. There's not a bug in the sky, and they don't want to be there. They miss their boyfriend or their girlfriend. We had co-ed trips, okay? Or they miss their curling iron or whatever it is, okay? And then I still remember one time we had a girl, her name was Teresa Pash. I still remember this after all. Wonderful young lady. And she loved the outdoors, and the kids nicknamed her Injun. So it was one night in the Boundary Waters, it started to rain. I'm telling you, it came down like you cannot believe. It was such a torrent. I said, that's it. I was under the fly, but you couldn't even stay dry under the fly. I said, that's it. I'm going to the tent. There's Injun sitting out on a rock with a poncho over her, just loving every minute. So you're born with it. You can change hate to tolerance, tolerance to like to love, but there's no way you can change hate to love. I know I have a grandson like that. I took him to the Boundary Waters when he was 10. He hated every minute of it. He just doesn't have the gene.
Yeah.
So, that's how you get there. But answer your question, how did I get to where I am? First, I read everything in print that everybody wrote. Then I started doing it. And one of the things I discovered right off the bat was there was an awful lot of writers out there who are spending too much time behind, in those days, the typewriter, and not enough time in the woods.
Sure.
Because they were telling me stuff that was flatly wrong. So that's when I started writing. I started writing magazine articles. And then it just took off from there. And then it was the books. But the thing about my books are everything that's in there has been done by me and my close friends. Okay? There's nothing that's in there that comes from a manufacturer or somebody. And then there's another interesting observation. There are some people who go to the wilderness, and when they go, they're constantly learning. All right? And if it doesn't work, they try something else. And they keep trying until they get it right. There are other groups of people who go to the wilderness and they can be miserable. They can spend long periods of time in the wilderness. Some of these people spend weeks or months in the wilderness, and they don't learn from their experience. Example of that would be the famous canoeist Verlin Kruger.
Sure.
Well, let me just not Verlin knew this guy. Verlin knew this guy. He wrote he was sort of ghostwriter, wrote Verlin's book. Okay, this guy and his son, I'm not going to mention the names. This guy and his son did about a month-long canoe trip down a northern river in Canada. They took what they had cotton hooded sweatshirts for warmth. The tent they got from from their hardware store. It was a piece of junk. Halfway through the trip, the tent blew down, broke poles and stuff. So they did manage to finish the trip. They went back to the hardware store, and the hardware store guy said, well, this was defective and gave them another one. So instead of learning from their experience there, they did a second trip with that same tent, tent. And of course, it blew down too. And then they were basically so miserable that they found, they camped one night at a campsite that had a cairn in it with a bunch of notes in it. And they wrote a note, something to the effect of, "We promise God never to canoe in the north again." Okay. So they never learn. Some people don't learn. So there are some people that will say, and I had a guy say this to me once. They said, "Cliff, what was the longest trip you ever did?" I said, 31 days. He says, "Well, I've been out 54. So I know more than you do." Okay. So it's not time spent out there. It's how you spend the time out there.
Sure.
Now, there's another interesting point that I want to share with listeners. A lot of the stuff that they're going to read in my books, not a lot of it, but some of it, they're going to roll their eyes. They're going to say, "No, I know I don't do it that way." Well, let me explain it to you this way. If you haven't had it bad enough, long enough, you can't relate. One example, of course, is the ground cloth inside the tent. So I sort of view it this way. Let's pretend you're driving a car down the road with your friend who's a NASCAR race driver. Okay? You've been driving for 40 years. You get into a turn and you're going a little too fast. So you hit the brakes. And your friend turns to you and says, "Hey, man, not good to hit brakes in the middle of a curve." You turn to your friend and you say, "Hey, man, I've been doing this for 40 years and never had a problem." So then your friend turns to you and says, "Try that at twice the speed and see what happens." In other words, what I'm saying is the kind of trips that I've done, we're going twice the speed. Sure. So what works at home and gentle stuff is not going to necessarily work in the woods. And that's why when I did my trips, the equipment that I furnished for people, and I furnished everything, of course, except the personal gear, sleeping bags, foam pads, but everything else, tents, packs, canoes, paddles, the whole ball of wax. The tents I used were Cannondale rustics with twin vestibules, and in 1987, those tents were $350 each.
So let me ask you this. Let me ask you, a lot of your books and work has been centered around, and speeches as well. You're well known on the, as we mentioned, on the, I don't know if you could call it a circuit, but the outdoor adventure expos. You give speeches. A lot of it is centered around this tips and tricks and how to improve your experience in the wilderness. What are some of your best-selling titles? First, I guess. I know you've authored over 20 books. And what are some of the overarching big tips and tricks that you keep coming back to that resonate with people?
Well, let me grab this. Give me 1 second.
Sure.
Okay, if you want tips and tricks, and I can go over a few of them that will make most people roll their eyes. This is the book right here, Camping's Top Secrets. Now, brand new edition. It came off the press yesterday.
All right. Okay? That's what I'm talking about.
So that's that one. Now, if you're a canoeist or kayaker and you want to do northern rivers or you want to do difficult rivers, that's this one here. This is Canoeing Wild Rivers. Now you go look that up on the web. This is always in the top 15 or so books. This is the Bible.
Canoeing Wild Rivers.
Yeah, this is the Bible. There's no how to canoe information in there. This is just nuts and bolts for doing a trip and coming out alive. And finally, if you want to have a youngster, this is a novel, okay, but it's unique. It's called Justin Cody's Race to Survival. It's unique because it's fiction and nonfiction. In other words, I decided to do this book because I was tired of seeing a bunch of gray hairs in the wilderness. And I said, how do we get kids involved? And I said, kids who like to read will read. But most kids don't know if they like the wilderness or not. or like to read because their head's stuck in their cell phone all day long. So I said, I'm going to write a high adventure novel that'll keep their interest on every page, but it's really going to be a how-to camp and canoe book in disguise.
Great.
Okay. Basically what happens is, there's a Chicago mafia involved. He's there with his grandpa. He doesn't want to do this trip. His grandpa gets taken away. He has to survive, and all he has to survive is some stuff in the day pack that they had from lunch and a book that his grandfather gave him that tells everything he needs to know. See, that kid doesn't like to read either. So it's a cool story. So,
and all this stuff is available at, what's your website? CliffJacobsen.com?
Well, no, it's CliffCanoe.com.
CliffCanoe.
Yeah, and they can order books from me if they want them. I sign them, or there's an Amazon click there. They can get them from Amazon if they want.
Okay.
The difference is Amazon sells them cheaper. The only thing I can't buy them that cheap. The only thing I can do is autograph them.
Okay. So next question. I've been to a few of your speeches, and I have to admit, I was in that category, thinking I was hardened and trail tested. And one of your tips and tricks, I have now committed to habit. And that, of course, would be the ground cloth inside the tent. It's so classic. It makes so much sense. It's just so logical. Can you explain the tip here?
Yeah. All right. Well, first of all, if we have a little time here, most people don't know the origin of floors and tents.
Okay.
They think floors were put in tents to keep out water. No, they're not old enough, because the early tents did not have floors. So I want you to picture a boxy tent with no floor. Now, when I was in the Boy Scouts, if you were a first class scout, you could look at this tent, you could go bang, 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 and you'd get it almost perfect. Okay. You might have to move, but if you weren't really practiced with this, you got no floor to keep the geometry. You're moving stakes around until you get it right.
Sure.
So then somebody said, let's put a floor in this. Now, the minute you put the floor in, now you set the geometry. Okay. So what happened then? People started using plastic underneath the floor, so they think would protect the floor.
Right. Commonly called a ground cloth or a ground tarp?
It's called what do they call it?
A tent.
It's called a.
It's on the tip of my tongue.
Well, it escapes me.
Yeah.
Footprint.
Footprint. That's what it's called. Yeah.
That's it. Footprint. All right. So here's the question that I would ask those people. Here's a nice grassy area with a concrete slab. Would you pitch your tent on that concrete slab? The answer is, of course not. If it rain's going to come in between the concrete slab. It's going to go through the floor. Well, when you put that plastic under the floor, it's the same thing as pitching it on a slab of concrete. Why? Because the interior of the floor is coated with waterproof material, and the coating is roughly about 100 pounds per square inch. That really sounds like a lot, doesn't it? Well, say you weigh 200 pounds, and you kneel on one knee on the floor. 200 pounds on 2 inches of surface is 100 pounds per square inch. Water could be coming in, whereas the plastic is non-woven. I don't know what it'll take, several hundred PSI, whatever it is.
Sure.
And furthermore, I would submit to you, people think they're protecting the floor. No, you're not. Okay. All right. Now follow this one. I learned most of my canoeing in wood strip canoes. I was a teacher. We didn't have any money. We built our own boats. We built tandem canoes. We built solo canoes and so forth. And I paddled my wood strip solo canoe in big rapids. I took it to Canada. I paddled it down the Steel River all the way to Lake Superior. And some of those rapids were class 3. Okay. All right. Then you'd have to patch the boat, because you were always hitting stuff. And one of the things, we kept putting more glass on the outside. This was of the boat. This was before Kevlar. And then one day we noticed something interesting. Brakes were always like this. In other words, you know what a green stick brake is? You take a green stick, you bend it. You keep bending it, and the way it breaks, it always doesn't break on the compression end. It breaks on the elongation side. It goes pop like this, right?
Yep.
Okay. Now picture your tent floor. The coating, waterproof coatings on the inside. You start pushing a thorn through there. Now, if you could take a picture of what was happening, microscopic picture, you would find that what happens is the fabric starts stretching, and it keeps stretching until the coating on top breaks. Then the thorn comes through. Now, if you make it thicker, okay, now you've got something on top. It can't push through. It has to push through both that and the plastic in order to make the hole.
Sure.
Okay. So, if you put the plastic under the floor, people say, well, I don't have it, so it extends beyond that. It doesn't matter. You're just pitching the tent on a smaller slab of concrete. Now, I'm going to tell you a story.
And so quickly, your solution, just to be clear, so your solution is rather than pitching a footprint underneath your tent on the bare ground, you take a tarp or some sort of plastic sheet and lay it on the inside of your tent. So it would go tent floor, plastic sheet, and then sleeping pad, sleeping bag.
Yes, and you make the plastic so it rolls up the side of the tent about 6 or 8 inches all the way around.
And there you go. So even if you have water underneath your tent, it's not going to permeate through that plastic sheet that you're sleeping on.
Yeah.
Genius.
Yeah, I actually have pictures in the book, Camping's Top Secrets, that shows a flooded tent.
Sure.
I've had that happen actually several times.
I have too.
Well, the most interesting one was when we flew into the North Knife River in Manitoba. Flew half the crew in, and then he said, I'll be back in about 2 hours, 2.5 hours. Well, the minute he left, the wind came up, and pretty soon there's 4-foot rollers on the lake. We couldn't go anywhere. He dropped us off at the edge of a swamp because that's the only place he could land. Now, this was before cell phones and GPS. Even if we could have moved, if we moved, he would maybe he wouldn't find us the next day anyway. But we couldn't move. So I remember walking in that swamp, standing there. Water came over my boot about 1/2 inch. Okay, so we pitched those tents in 1.5 inches of water, put the plastics inside. We were stuck there for 2 days because of the storm. He didn't come. And it was like, it went inside. It was like sleeping on a waterbed. The tent went like this, like this. It was completely filled with water, but everybody slept dry. So that's an example of what I mean. Not hitting your brakes in the middle of a curve.
Sure. And a lot of your books and speaking, is I've already mentioned, is kind of themed around that. But another common theme that I always appreciated from your stuff is that a lot of people these days are gear gurus, right? The latest and greatest, the best fabric, the lightest, cutting off the butt end of their toothbrush in order to save an ounce. Give me your general philosophy on that, because I think we're similar in that you don't need NASA approved raincoat to have a great time in the outdoors.
No, actually, you're exactly right. First of all, if you look at people who are seriously good in the wilderness, they don't have the most modern stuff. They don't have the best stuff. One, they can't afford it. Two, skills are more important than things, okay? And I see people, they show up, they have the latest and the greatest of everything, but they don't know what they're doing. They don't have the skills with it. And secondly, one of the things that happens with equipment, and I've been reviewing equipment for a lot of years, is they'll come out with a new model. This is new. So you automatically think this is better. Wrong. In many, many cases, the original early model was the best. Now what they're trying to do is figure out how to make it cheaper. So for example, in gasoline stoves, if you went back 20 years, you would not find a plastic part on a gasoline stove. Maybe a handle knob, that's it. Everything was either aluminum or steel or brass or whatever. Now many of the new stoves, gasoline stoves, plastic parts, plastic pumps. Yeah. The truth is, plastic does not belong on a trail stove. Okay, you get flares up, stuff happens. There are lots of cases where people have gotten hurt. So the older stoves were just better than the newer stoves. Now, you want to talk about tents? It's pretty much the same deal. What's happened is manufacturers do these surveys, and they find that the average person uses their tent something like 5 days a year. So, you don't need to strive for 5C in a tent that's going to be used 5 days a year. And furthermore, you can save a lot of money when you make this tent by using what I call, first of all, a cap fly. A cap fly, well, for listeners who don't really understand tent mechanics, tents come in two parts. There's an interior canopy, which is breathable, lets the air in and out. And then there's a fly that goes over the top. Okay, that's waterproof. That's supposed to keep the water out. So some of these tents have cap flies. In other words, the fly doesn't stake all the way to the ground. Now, the manufacturer is going to tell you they're doing this so that you get better ventilation. That's a bunch of baloney. They're doing it to save bulk and weight and price, okay? And so that's the deal. So if you're going to go in harm's way, you need a tent that can stand it. And that means you're either going to wind up with an expedition tent, or look at the European tents. The Europeans, they use their tents hard, and tents like Hilberg, oh my God, the Hilbergs are the best tents in the world, all right? So anything you want to pick almost, I think if you went back in time, you would find that the early ones were better. When I started camping, I had a Trailwise sleeping bag. It was made in Berkeley, California. That bag died, but that was the best down bag I've ever owned, and I've owned 5 or 6 down bags since then.
What are a few of your overarching classic tips? For instance, I would consider, at least for my career, or not career, but my outdoor pursuits, the tarp inside the tent has been a game changer. What are some of the other ones that resonate with people?
Okay, the other big one that resonates with people is the bear thing. These keep hanging their stuff in trees and thinking a bear won't get it. What you have to understand about black bears is they all climb trees. When Mama Bear has her baby and she's worried, the first thing she does is she sends the kid up a tree, and he'll go 70, 50, 75 feet up a tree, and Mama will follow, okay? In the Smoky Mountains National Park, black bears overwinter in nests they build in trees. Yet you want to put your food in a tree. Here's the deal. The feds don't care if a bear gets your food, but they do care if a bear gets you. And they know they got a lot of stupid people out in the woods. So they have to have some sort of a formula to keep you and the bears away from one another. The formula is people here, food up in that tree. The bear will climb up and that bear will get your food. No ands or ifs, but he won't get you. So now what they do is they have a formula for the tree. The limb has to be, 10 feet off the ground. The pack has to be 6 feet out. Go to northern Minnesota, go to Ontario, go to Saskatchewan, go to Canada, and see if you can find any trees that meet that description. You won't, because the trees are too small up there. So you can keep putting your food in a tree all you want, but bears are going to get your food. When I remember.
So what's the solution?
Oh, the solution is, first of all, if a bear can't see your food or smell your food, he won't get your food. And I know what people think. Oh, a feather can fall from a tree a mile away and a bear will smell it. If you look at the boundary waters, the campsites that bears get into, you're going to find that you got a bear a quarter of a mile away. He is not smelling your freeze-dried chicken tetrazzini, which is sealed in Mylar. You know what he's smelling? He's smelling you. And he says, aha, people in campsite 21, there's food where there's people, and that's where I'm going. Now, when he gets in your campsite, if you don't have your food packed right, he will probably smell that. If you have a pack on the ground and he has learned that food comes in packs, he will take that pack apart. You might have camera equipment in there or sleeping bags. He will take that pack apart. It's operant conditioning. That's how he's been conditioned. So what do I do? What do I tell people to do? I won't tell you what I do, but what I tell people to do who go to the boundary waters and are worried about bears is, one, pack so that they can't smell your food, first of all, okay? Put it in either Ziploc bags or, better yet, vacuum seal, okay? Number two, don't leave it right in your tent. Just sort of stick it out in the woods a bit, under a tree somewhere. You'll be just fine. Now, if you do like some people do, oh, I'm going to put it right down by the shoreline. Oh, that's a real smart move, because where do animals look for food? They walk along the shoreline. So that's not a smart move. Or I'm going to stick it in a canoe, and I'm going to set the canoe out and tie the canoe to a tree. Pretty dumb move, because the bear will turn the canoe over and get
That
your
sounds
food.
like the worst option.
Just hide it in the woods, and you won't have a problem. In fact, one time I did this. I do a big long bear talk. Did this at Canoecopia, and I said, "How many of you have ever had your food gotten that a bear got your food?" There was probably about 15, 20 hands. There was like 400 people in the audience. I said, now, how many of you people had it in a tree when the bear got it? Every single hand went up again. So, you know what?
Love it.
Okay, that's another pet peeve.
Yeah.
You know,
okay,
there's a bunch of...
What do you got for number 3? We got tarpon tent, hanging your bear food. Bear hang is useless.
Okay. All right. So number 3, there's a bunch of, but number 3 probably would be about tents. Be aware that the tent you buy is probably not going to be suitable for the high winds of an Arctic trip. For example, if you go down the Yukon River, you can wake up one morning and you got a 50-mile-an-hour wind. And if you have one of these simple domes that you brought from home, it's gone. Seriously. So there are instructions in my book, Canoeing Wild Rivers, and in Canoeing Wild Rivers and in Camping Stock Secrets, of how to take that tent and with a sewing machine and about 4 hours time, convert it so that it will take those kind of winds. Because here's the deal. You're going to be adding storm lines, you're going to be adding storm loops, and things like that. You might say, why doesn't the manufacturer do this to begin with? And there's a lot of reasons. One of the reasons is every time they sew a storm loop on, it's probably cost them 20 cents. You add 20 of them, okay, it's $4 more a tent or whatever. Secondly, they're going to give you, there's a little game that these manufacturers play, which is my tent sets up faster than yours, or my tent sets up with less stakes than yours. So they're going to design the tent to set up with a minimum of, say, 6 stakes. That's not enough. But if you have all these storm loops all over, somebody's going to contact the manufacturer and say, what? I got 32 stake points here. Am I supposed to have 32 stakes?
Right.
No, dumbhead. But if you have a high wind, you're going to use all the ones on that side. So that's what this is really, really all about. Okay? So that's why when I did my trips, I never let anybody use their own tents unless they said, oh, I have a Cannondale Rustic, a North Face VE25, something of that ilk. Fine, you can take that tent.
Sure. Great. Now, how about some of the trips that you've done over the years? Obviously, you've guided and outfitted trips all across North America, to the Arctic. I know you've been up in the Hudson Bay area. What are some of the highlights, destinations from your canoeing career that come to the forefront?
Well, obviously my favorite, most memorable trip is the Hood River, which is north of the Arctic Circle, goes north of the Arctic Circle. So I've done the Hood twice, once with 5 other guys and once with my fiance, because we were married on the Hood. Oh. And that story is in Canoeing Wild Rivers. But the beauty of the Hood and the Fluieza Thayan, which is another incredible river that I did, was the caribou. When we did the Hood, we stood in the middle of literally 100,000 caribou. Okay, and on that river, I was grizzly. There was a grizzly in the distance. I thought it was a muskox. I got down and worked my way towards it. And when I was about 50 yards away, I stood up. It stood up along with its two cubs and started racing towards me. And I went down into a ball in the tundra, put my hands behind my head, and I said, "Oh, please, God, don't let me die in the tundra." Well, they came. I couldn't see what was happening, but my buddies on a hill did. They could see. They said the bear came within about 100 feet of me, couldn't find me, probably thought I was a baby caribou and left. So you see, the point is you see thousands of caribou. Now the caribou herds have pretty much disappeared now. So you will still see some caribou, but you're not going to see these thousands like I saw. You'll see grizzly bears for sure. Polar bears, though, those are interesting. Seals, whales, muskox, hundreds of muskox. That's why we go north.
You bet. How about polar bear encounters? What have you had a couple?
Yes, I've had two very dicey ones. The most dicey one was on the North Knife River. We were about 50 miles from Hudson Bay on the North Knife, and there was a polar bear on River Left along with a cub. And the minute I saw her, I said, "Okay, guys, go, River Right, go, go, go." This one canoe wanted to get a picture of her. So they went River Left. And when they got too close, it's called invading their space. You can only get so close, then you invade their space, then it's a problem. They both jumped into the river and started chasing this canoe.
Jeez.
So they chased us across the river to River Right. We got over there faster. Then as they were coming, we went back to River Left, and she turned around, came back. Then we went back to River Right again. My wife had to go to the bathroom. So that's a little humorous story anyway. The minute we got ashore, there was a hill there. So I got everybody up the hill, okay? And got everybody up the hill, and I jacked the shell into my rifle, and my buddy pumped a shell into his shotgun, and we just stood there, and all of a sudden I'm yelling, "Susie, Susie, there's a bear." Well, what happened was the bear came up behind Susie, okay?
Jeez.
She was upriver, okay? The bear came up behind her. So I said, "Susie, there's a bear behind." So she started running into the group. Of course, the minute she started running, the bear started running towards her. And she got into the group. And when the bear was about, I'd say, maybe 125, 150 feet away. She was closer than 50 yards. Okay, I told my friend, I said, put a slug under her nose. So he put a slug under her nose. And I mean, I'm thinking, I don't want to kill this bear. If I kill this bear, I'm going to be in Canada filling out paperwork for a month. Seriously.
Yeah, I believe
so
it.
So then what happened? The bear stopped, and this sounds hokey, but it's not. I started talking to this bear. I've done this with other bears many times, and it was a very calm conversation. It was like, "Hey, mama, we don't want to hurt you. We don't want to hurt your cub. We're going to be out of here soon. You guys, you just go away now. Let us leave, and we'll leave you alone." I was talking to her like a parent would be talking to a child that he or she loves. That's, "You've been bad, but I still love you."
Right.
Okay. And then that bear slithered back into the water. We got in our canoes, went downstream, and then she cautiously followed us. She probably stayed 50 yards behind us all the time. That's just one. There's lots of other stories where bears have come in camp and you talk to them. They don't understand what you're saying, of course, but they understand your body language.
Yeah, and your tone, I would imagine.
And the thing is, if you don't have a gun, your body language is going to be like, "Oh, hey bear, I'm not going to hurt you." Okay, so like I say, never had to shoot a bear, but if you're going in polar bear country or where you're going to encounter a lot of grizzlies, just think of it this way. A polar bear can probably swim 5 miles an hour in ice water for 100 miles before taking a break.
It's a long ways.
Something like that.
What any other wildlife scenarios, bear or other, that come to mind from your times?
Well, yeah, actually, this goes along with the closest I ever came to dying on a canoe trip.
Uh-oh.
And if you ask people what they're most afraid of on a canoe trip with them, the first thing they're going to tell you is dying in a rapid. You know what? that's down the line. If you're going to die in water, it's going to be a long open crossing, and you're going to capsize, and you're going to die in ice cold water. Okay. Or realistically, what's going to happen is your tent's going to blow down in a polar gale. We had 62-mile-an-hour winds for 3 days straight. You better have a good tent, okay, on one of our trips. Okay, but now this one, there was 2 times I almost died on a canoe trip. One was when a caribou almost either hit me or my wife. This was on the Thayan River. There's a cliff on River Left. It's not real high. It's maybe 15 feet high. And there are hundreds of caribou milling around up there. The alpha caribou male comes along and he's looking downriver. He wants to cross this river. He's looking for a place to cross. Now, the way it works is he'll go. If he gets across to the other side, then it's a banana farm. They all go. Mamas, newborn babies that are 30 minutes old, they all go. A lot of them drown, but they all go. So he doesn't see Susie and I snugged up against the left shore, and he jumps. And when he jumps, his hooves miss Susie's head by about a foot. And I could feel the wind back here. And then and then what happened is he went in, the current carried him down and hit a Volkswagen-sized rock. Pow! He got up and he turned around because he was bleeding on his left side. He turned around, he looked back up to them, and then from that part, then he crossed the rest of the river. So the rest of the caribou moved back and crossed further back. So these animals may be smarter than you think.
Yeah.
Okay. So I mean, that was one interesting caribou thing. Another one was when I was on one of the trips, we're paddling down the river. The caribou are crossing while we're paddling. They're not stopping. And I remember stroking the back of one with my paddle.
Holy cow.
And I remember, you really, in the water, you can't tell the males from the females because they all have racks, And there was a baby caribou, and he was like in danger of drowning, and his mom was trying to hold his head up. Now I saw that, but when I went to Yellowknife and I talked to the rangers there, they said they don't do that. I said I saw him do that. Well, they don't do that. She did it. Okay. And the second time I was almost killed was this was on the which river? This was the Blood Vein River. We're just coming out into Lake Winnipeg, and there was a float plane that was on the dock further. We had to go further. We just waved at him and we kept going. And I had 5 canoes, and they were all spread out along all along the river. And all of a sudden, around the bend comes this float plane, and he's trying to take off. He doesn't have enough speed to take off, and he's really going too fast to shut down, or he's going to hit us. So he guns it with full blast. He has nowhere to go, and he comes right over my head.
Oh my!
And that plane is, I would say, 10 feet above us. And as he goes ahead of us, he goes up and bangs to the right, or bangs to the left, and I can see the look of horror on his face.
He thought he almost killed you, or he almost did.
Those were the 2 times. Yeah. So, that's why we do these trips, though. It is an adventure.
Absolutely.
It is an adventure.
What about the? I saw on your list of rivers that you've paddled the Little Missouri River in Theodore Roosevelt National Park. How about that river? Do you have any recollection from that? That's one that's been. I love the Little Missouri. It's been on my periphery for some time, but from my understanding, it's one of those that has to be the timing has to be right for water levels.
Yeah. You know what? Hardly anybody ever does this river because basically you can't do it because it's too shallow. And we just happened to time this thing in the spring when it was raining. Everything was in flood stage. So we got on the Little Missouri, and right before we, you want to be sure you're wearing rubber boots because it's very, very muddy. The river's delightful. There's no rapids. The camping is really nice. You cannot build a fire. That's the only problem. Because you're going through the national park. So everything, you're going to have to cook on a stove. At first, I thought, oh, come on, North Dakota. Do I want to go to North Dakota? And then when I got on, so we were all paddling solo canoes, by the way. And then when I got on this river, I started really gaining respect for North Dakota. Why? Because we had some super high winds. We had rain. It snowed one day. Okay. It was like, hey, man, this is good practice for going to the Arctic. Okay. So I think we did, if I remember right, I think we started right at the ranger station there at Teddy Roosevelt National Park.
Yep.
I think we did like 120 miles or something like that. But it was interesting. After we got off the river, we met a couple that was just starting it, and they wanted to do the same trip as us. But the river had dropped so much that by the time we finished it, we could barely get our solo canoes down it. So they had to cut their trip short, and they had to get out. There's several places you can get out. They got out earlier, and she said, well, sure glad you told me because we were running out of water. But it's a wonderful trip if there's enough water.
Sure.
If there's enough water.
And I when I was talking to you, I guess it would have been earlier in the year or maybe last year, you'd mentioned that you were doing a few trips down, was it in Big Bend? Is that right?
Oh, yeah. Well, we'd done the Rio Grande. I've done the Rio Grande 3 times. Had to abort a 4th time because we had one of our guys along has Alzheimer's disease and was crashing and burning in the rapids.
Sure.
That's in one of my blogs. If somebody wants to read that, that's an interesting story. It's called Knowing When It's Time to Quit.
Sure.
And it's on my blog, and he's a very, very good friend. But anyway, the Rio Grande is my favorite all-time American river.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and there's a lot of reasons. First of all, it's extremely remote. You crash and burn on the Rio Grande, you're going to have 50 or 60 miles of walking through stuff that everything you're walking through cuts, burns, or sticks you. Okay?
Sounds pleasant.
And if you look on the maps, they do have nice maps of Big Bend National Park. It shows trails going down there. I defy you to find any one of them. And if you find one, I defy you, I'm talking to it from the river, to finding it from the river. I defy you to stay on them because nobody does this. They don't, they don't keep them open. But the Rio Grande has everything you could want. It has cliffs 1,000 feet high. It has incredible scenic beauty. You can camp anywhere you want. The water quality is generally pretty good. So usually you don't have to carry water or you can settle it with alum. That's another little tip. That's a real important tip for people going out west. And it has some real challenging rapids.
Huh.
It's divided into the upper part and the lower part. The upper part can be done in a solo canoe or a standard tandem canoe, but you got to be a good team.
Sure.
You don't have to be great. Okay, you got to be comfortable in class 2 whitewater. Okay. The lower end, you're going to be in like Upper Madison Rapids. You're not going to run that, but you're going to be running some class 3 stuff. And the thing is, you can't crash and burn, seriously, because how do you get out? The only way you can get out is sit there and either wait until some rangers come down, and they do once in a while, but you're going to sit a while. And because there's only 3 river rangers, okay, on the whole river. Okay, on the whole river, okay, that goes through the park. But at the lower end, you want to use either a whitewater boat or something that's pretty capable, or something like a SOAR, SOAR, which stands for Somewhere on a River. It's a high-end inflatable canoe, something of that nature. But you really need to know what you're doing, even more so on the lower end. And as far as camping is concerned, and you check in at with the Americans in the park, they're going to tell you cannot camp on the Mexican side. Yeah. It's a bunch of baloney. Camp where you want. It's an international river. I know that none of the federal authorities will bother you for camping on the Mexican side any more than they would bother the Mexicans camping on the American side. It's an international river, and under the treaty of Guadalupe, it's legal.
There you go. I like it.
You know,
I'll tell him. I'll tell him that Cliff Jacobson said it was just fine.
it's fine, man. It's fine.
That's
They're
great.
not. And the other thing is when you do that river, it's like doing any other river. You can't just say, "Oh, I'm going to camp on River Left all the time," because a lot of times you might go all day and there's no campsites on River Left.
Right.
You got to camp on the other side.
Yeah.
Okay. And this is true. Actually, as you go through some of the canyons, you're going to find that, hey, this is the only place to camp. And I can, I have it on good authority that you will not be bothered. They'll give you the party line.
Sure.
But I do have to say the rangers who operate in that park are absolutely amazing, wonderful, spectacular people who believe in wildness, want to keep this place wild, and understand what's going on here.
I love it.
They don't get better than those rangers.
So you've got the Rio Grande Big Bend National Park as one of the top rivers for canoeists in America. Obviously, you've traveled all over. What is your Mount Rushmore or your top couple river or canoeing trips if someone were to make a bucket list trip or a bucket list canoeing adventure?
Well, first of all, if they're going to make a bucket list trip, then they're going to have to be a good whitewater canoeist to begin with. Secondly, they're going to have to be a very top camper that can handle winds of 60 miles an hour, okay? Because those things can happen. Thirdly, they're going to have to be a good navigator, and they better not be relying on the map in their cell phone, okay? And when I say, so that's the start. But the Everest depends who you talk to. If you read Bill Mason's book, Path of the Paddle, Song of the Paddle, he loved the mountain river. Now, I have not done the mountain, but my friends have. And the mountain is characterized by huge canyons and very, very high waves, very big waves, okay? Bill Mason later did the Hood River. And if you read between the lines, you get the impression that he really liked the Hood better. Why? I think the Hood is one of the most uniquely well-balanced rivers in the far north. There are tiny little streams. There are like ponds. There are big, huge lakes to cross. There are pounding rapids that go for miles. There are waterfalls. Dozens and dozens of waterfalls, including Wilberforce Falls, which drops 160 feet through a 3-mile canyon. By comparison, the U.S. Niagara drops, I think it's 167 feet.
Holy cow.
Susie and I were married at the top of Wilberforce Falls. So, but the Hood used to have thousands of caribou and muskox and grizzly bears. Unfortunately, the muskox, they're not gone, but the big herds are gone. But you will still see caribou and muskox. I think that's personally, of all the ones I've done, that's kind of my
Sure.
favorite Canadian river. But now, if people want to do an easy river with no rapids that rate above, I would say, low class 2, that you can paddle 360 miles on without making a portage.
Love that.
There is only one, and that is the Noatak River in Alaska.
All right.
And in the Noatak, you will see grizzly bears, for sure, muskox, for sure, possibly caribou, depending on where you start. If you go all the way to Kotzebue, Alaska, in the lower end, you're going to see dozens, hundreds, maybe even more than that, tens and tens of grizzly bears feeding on salmon. They're not going to bother you. They're feeding on salmon. But that would be a trip for people who, they're not hotshot whitewater paddlers. They don't want to do a portage, but they want to see absolute beautiful country and hiking, okay? The Noatak. In my view, it's a pretty easy river. In fact, if they go on my website, there's a blog I can't remember the name of it, but it's something like eight rivers. 8 rivers that you can paddle without dying, or something like that. It's called. You have to play around on the blog thing to
Sure.
find, but it lists those rivers and tells why.
Great,
Mhm.
great. Well,
Great.
we'll kind of wrap it down and try and tie it back together here. But I'm curious. Obviously, with all of your teaching, both in the sciences in the school and also out in the woods and on the trail with youth over the years. Obviously, you mentioned that you just wrote a kid's book. What are some of the overarching things that living this life connected to the outdoors and tripping and canoeing has given you, and you see value to passing on to children? What have been some of the things that you've taken away from a lifetime in the woods, I guess?
Well, I'm not sure how to answer that because you do the same thing. It's just a calmness, and I think the most important thing is that you never do at home. Is you live for the every day. You live for the day. You do not say, "Oh, tomorrow I got an appointment," or "Oh, I got a call." Da da da. None of that enters your mind. The only thing that enters your mind is, okay, we got to find a place to camp tonight. We have to make food tonight. Okay, let's look at the map. See what's going on for tomorrow. That's it. You're living in the moment, and that's what indigenous people did. So what's interesting to me is one of the questions I've always asked is, why did the American Indian not invent all the stuff the white man did? What? He wasn't as smart? Of course, he was every bit as smart. Why didn't he do it? He developed Stone Age culture to its highest, okay? And if you read some of the books about what it was like to be a white kid who was stolen by the Indians, okay, and then later the whites wanted to get him back, most of those kids didn't want to come back. They wanted to stay there. In fact, even the girls didn't want to come back because the women in those societies were actually accepted more as equals than the women in white society in that time period. And the boys would give answers like, "Well, until I was stolen, I worked on a potato farm. I got up at 4:30 every morning and I worked until dusk pulling potatoes. Now I get to ride horses and shoot buffalo." So, I think that's the reason. And many years ago, I had this experience to sort of set that in. We're crossing a lake. We did the Fond du Lac River in Saskatchewan. We're crossing, I forget which lake it was, Hatchet Lake. And there's a boat out there. There was an Indian guide in there and 2 sports. So I sort of paddled over and I asked the Indian guy there, I said, can you tell me what that rapid's like at the mouth of this? You think we can canoe it or whatever? And then a little idle chat. And I said to him, what do you do? Where do you work? He says, I work up there at Hatchet Lake 3 days a week. So I very innocently said to him, why just 3 days a week? Why not 4? No. I said, why not? Why just 3 days a week? And he looked me right in the eye and he said, can't get by on 2. Okay? And that's their attitude is they don't need stuff. They need enough to live happily, to get up and go fishing or go whatever they want to do. They don't want to work for the bank. And I think that's really a different attitude. But goes back to what we all started with, which is, I think it's a gene. Either you love being in a wild place and making those decisions, or you just don't.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter where you're born, or whether you're male or female. Yeah.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I've seen it clear as day. I know for sure. I always tell people it's in my blood. I mean, if I could wake up tomorrow and go fishing, that'd be a good day for me, Hey, Cliff, well, really appreciate you taking the time to talk. Tell us again where we can find out more about what you have going on, and is there anything that we should be looking forward to you coming out in the future?
Well, first of all, you can go to my website, cliffcanoe.com. You can email me at info@cliffcanoe.com, and I'll get right back with a personal answer. Or just go to the website and click in. There's a lot of stuff and news on there. There's blogs, there's articles, there's all sorts of stuff. You can play around. As far as what's coming up, I'm going to be doing Canoecopia in Madison is coming up in March. I'm going to do I have a couple of virtual presentations for them. Midwest Mountaineering will be, that's in Minneapolis. That's going to be coming up in April, and I'll be doing something for them too. Unfortunately, I won't be live this year, but my heart will be there with you guys. So.
Okay, great. Well, we'll see you next year,
Okay.
and paddle on, Cliff. Thanks again for taking the time to talk.
My pleasure, and best to you. Thanks, Will.
And there you have it, episode 39 of the Buffalo Roamer podcast with Cliff Jacobsen. If you like what you heard, please subscribe to the show. We got new episodes the first and third Friday of every month. You can find us on social media at Buffalo Roamer, Facebook, Instagram. Also, the website, www.buffaloroamer.com. We got all kinds of cool stuff up on the website. Journal entries from my Yukon River and Mississippi River trips. We got journal entries from a fishing trip in the Amazon River recently. We got in the jungles of Brazil. We got, what else is on there? All kinds of cool stuff. So go check it out. Some of the trips we have coming up, guided trips with Buffalo Roamer Outdoors. So go check it out at buffaloroamer.com. Get outside, get some fresh air, and we will talk to you with the next episode.